I'll introduce Wes. So Dr. Wes Lowe, he is from Mississippi State. I went down south for a meeting and met another crazy engineer, and you just can't have enough crazy engineers as friends. And so some of the stuff that he's doing, and even more so some of the stuff he talks about after he's had a beer or two, just told me he's the kind of the guy that we'd like to have up here. So they've been doing a lot of high-speed planter work and putting some cameras and stuff on the high-speed planters, and I wanted Wes to come up and tell a little bit about it. But Dr. Wes Lowe with Mississippi State.
Hey, well, thank y'all for sticking around to this afternoon session. So I'm, do I have to? I don't like standing up by the mic. I'm Wes Lowe. I'm an assistant professor in ag and bioengineering at Mississippi State. Before that, I was a research associate for a long time, so been involved in academia for quite some time, but in addition to that, I've been around production ag pretty much my whole life. So I'm everything that I do is based on true production systems and looks at it. I try to look at everything from the grower perspective, because at the end of the day, we can create anything in the world. We can create solutions, we can answer questions, but if nobody wants to use them, then what are we doing the work for? So one of the first things, I guess, that we started doing here as of late has been looking at see and spray technology. And, you know, as many of you know, Deere is pretty much taking control of just about that whole market right now. And there's got to be a better way. You know, paying by the acre to me just doesn't make good sense. By the way, these opinions are my own and not those of Mississippi State. That way I don't get fired when I get home. Anyway, I like my job. We met with Cotton Incorporated several years ago, I guess 3 now, and started looking at, are there other things that we can do to control weeds in row crop production systems? And one of the biggest concerns that we found was the fact that, that herbicide resistance continues to grow. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can control those. So looking at it from, and this plays into or applies to all row crop production systems, but looking at it from the cotton standpoint, because that's who funded the project, we're going to look at it at this point as cotton. So Mississippi, for those of you that don't know, is the number 5 cotton producing state, and we're not proud of 400,000 acres. We used to be well over 1 million just about 15 years ago. Grains have taken over our market. Soybeans probably around 2 million acres, and then corn about 750,000 acres. But this technology still is applicable to all row crop production systems. So some of the big things that that we really are concerned about are these troublesome weeds in our cotton production systems. And this list over here on the right, 2001 was identified as being our most common, and a lot of those, I'm sure you guys are dealing with the same things here. Weed pressures in our cotton can contribute to almost 40% in potential loss, and so because of that, we're trying to make sure that we figure out better ways to get those out of there. So looking at it from a reduced tillage system, you know, this is part of where our problem, I guess, comes in when it comes to control, is we're trying to keep that soil disturbed at a minimum. And with that, we get to retain our soil moisture and reduce erosion from rain and wind, and it improves our nutrient cycle. I know this is not new information for you, but thinking about it from that standpoint, herbicide has been our primary means of control up until this point. And so as we think about this, here's our problem. You know, these troublesome weeds, all of those X's there on the right are things that we've identified in Mississippi in cotton production as being herbicide resistant. And it doesn't make any difference how much herbicide you put on it, they're still going to be there, and they're just going to keep becoming that more and more and more resistant. So even if we change chemistries, and we're already seeing that with our auxins, we're starting to see resistance again. So I don't think, in the grand scheme of things, unfortunately for the people, the chemical people in here, I apologize, but I'm just going to be pretty blunt with you. I just don't think that by itself, herbicides are the way that we're going to be able to control this. So we've got to think outside the box a little bit. So if we think about an integrated weed management program, and as a way for us to be able to control our weeds and our production systems, then we can really start to come up with better solutions for that. So if we look at an integrated weed management program, we've got all of these pieces that we're using. If you notice there on the lower right, that's one of the things that we're doing very little of, or have not done a lot of in a long time, is mechanical control. How many of you do mechanical control like row crop? You do. There are some, and we do have that, but it's not prevalent. It's not like it used to be. So there's one thing that weeds are definitely not resistant to, and that's cold steel. So that's an option for us in this integrated weed management program. So with that, we started thinking about how can we use tillage as a component to our overall weed management program, and possibly bring back some of the efficacy of herbicides. So we drug an old John Deere 845 row crop cultivator out of the weeds and decided, hey, maybe we can use this. This is our platform that we use to create an automated tactical tillage tool. We call it the AT3. I know that Chevrolet and GMC have the AT4. This one's made by Ford because we wanted it to work. So, this AT3 platform is basically the combination of reducing our tillage and into that in our integrated weed management program, but it gives us that reduced tillage to be able to rely a little less on herbicides to overall control our weeds. So if you think about it from a conservation tillage plus our integrated weed management program, where we're using herbicides and a mechanical control, we have that's basically the intersection of those two is where the AT3 platform fits into this. So if you look at I keep backing up, the components of the AT3. So basically, we took that row crop cultivator and we outfitted it with hydraulics to raise and lower the plows, and then used hydraulic solenoid valve that's controlled through a PLC to trigger that up-down response. And with that, we have the ability to prescriptively till where weeds are, and only where weeds are. So thereby we save our soil moisture. We're only disturbing the soil in small areas, and then that way, just like with See and Spray, where we're only using herbicide where we've got weeds, we're doing the same thing here. We're only tilling where there are weeds. So this is a lot more close-up pictures of that hydraulic system. So basically, if you look there on the right, we removed for those of you that are familiar with the plow setup, we removed the adjustment screw for the gauge wheel and replaced it with another bracket and a hydraulic cylinder, which then is fed through this mechanical hydraulic valve. That's tied back into the PLC. So our initial trial at this was, okay, if we can detect a weed and plow it out, then maybe we're onto something here. And so instead of reinventing the wheel, which we as engineers sometimes do, we sometimes try to overcomplicate things. I use the pretty simple, the KISS method, and I stole some technology that was already available out there. So the Trimble Weed Seeker system, how many of you are familiar with it? How many of you used it? So this basically, it uses spectral reflectance. So it's looking at incorporation. No, I saw two more. There were a couple more people that raised their hand. You just didn't see it. Yeah, you can come up here where you can see if you want to. So, so basically the crop, the weed absorbs one spectrum of light and reflects the other. So we basically create a comparison between the soil and the weed to identify it. And instead of the spray cartridge that's attached to the back of this this weed seeker, we removed those and just tied it into to cabling that ran into the PLC to give us a trigger signal. So initially our thoughts were, okay, if we disturb the soil, then we need to spray a boundary back down so we don't create more problem than we eliminated. So we added the ability to put a boundary herbicide on behind. This is our PLC control system, and basically what it does again is it just ties everything together. It's integrated to where all of our signals from the individual weed seekers on the row could tell us we saw a weed and then trigger that up-down response. So we obviously don't want to just trigger the tillage and leave it down for whatever length of time. We actually worked out some control algorithms that rely on speed. So the slower we run, the longer the tillage implement stays down. As we move faster, then it's a quick up-down response. And as many of you know, unfortunately our speed sensors sometimes aren't the greatest in the world, and so you end up making the wrong calculation. So in order for us to be able to circumvent some of that, we added a GPS sensor and a ground radar, and we used those to correlate between the two. So we basically took the average of the two speeds, and it really improved our overall accuracy of being able to trigger that up and down response to where we basically just tilled where the weed was, and that was it. And this is the point. Oh, it's going to play. So it is going to work. I know, I'm excited too. And then it stopped. Maybe it is. I don't know. So this is the first. Oh, look at this. So it's a little bit difficult to see. This video was one of the few that we could find that actually showed some of the operation of the system. So as we drove through the field, why it's doing that, I don't know. Anyway, as it triggers to detect a weed, it drops down rather quickly, plows the weed out, picks itself back up, and continues to roll on. So we're only creating an area of disturbance about somewhere around 24 to 26 inches. So we're doing very little soil disturbance. And as always with an engineer, we looked at this and we said, you know what, this is great. This is really good, but we can make it better. So when we looked at this, we said, okay, when we evaluate this thing, how do we assess how does it work? So we looked at all of our major systems, and then we determined also how to assess it by weed size, type, and the effects of plant canopy on our detection. So to assess that, we moved it into a 20-acre soybean field. And obviously I talked a while ago about we're doing this in cotton. And the question I always get is why soybeans now when you started working on cotton? When we got ready to go to the field, our cotton was already pretty well mature, and this was a late season group of soybeans of group 4 and group 5s that were planted just for insect pressure. So the canopy was not quite developed, and what we had found already in some of our preliminary work was the fact that the canopy plays a huge part on the ability for that weed seeker to detect weeds. So we looked at two different dates, 53 and 63 days after planting, and then we classified these weeds in the field, and this is not a 40-foot plot either. These were about 1,100 foot rows, and we went through and we flagged everything by color. Used 3 different colors and flagged everything for basically categorized weeds as a small or anything that had a diameter of 2.5 inches or smaller, and then basically called medium 2.5 to 5 centimeters, and anything large, it was greater than 5 centimeters. And we looked at that. So if you statistically seeing how effective the plow is. So you have a 3-way analysis of variance where we looked at trial date, weed size, and soybean maturity group as our fixed effects at the 95% level of confidence. And so if we look at trial 1 and trial 2 comparatively, we see at trial 1, which is that first day, the first set of trials after planting, 53 days after planting, we were overall successful at 32.5% at detecting weeds of all sizes. However, if you look at trial 2, our efficacy improved to 72.2%. So what's the difference? The difference is we think that we did not set the sensor up correctly. There was a difference in the time of day, so our the background reflectance from the sun may have played a part of that. And when we break it down by trial 1 and trial 2 by size, we see that in trial 1, the small weeds, the ones that we couldn't see very well, we'd had a very low level of success. And the large weeds, we had about a 50% level of success. So that's basically, you could probably get better odds at the casino. But in trial 2, we actually started seeing some really good results in this. And so we started seeing that we could at least, at 70%, we could, basically 70%, we could detect weeds. So we felt really confident that we were onto something here. When we look at it broke out by maturity group and obviously canopy development, in trial 2 we see that we had almost a 90% success rate in our group 4 soybeans, which had a smaller or less developed canopy, which means that if we can see it and we get the sensor set right, then it works. Or works at a pretty decent level. So, and this is a picture of those two. So you can see our group 4s were really the middles were really wide, easy to see the weeds, whereas the group 5s had already started to cover the middles, and we started seeing the effects of the shading and other things that played into the ability to not detect weeds. So our initial conclusions from that were we could, obviously these spectral reflected sensors, in this case that Trimble Weed Seeker, do show promise. We did see a higher detection incidence with a lesser developed crop canopy. And unfortunately though, when you start thinking about an overall management program, we can't differentiate between weed species. And then also, again, I mentioned the lighting and the shading may hinder detection and cause false triggers with the system. So we wanted to take this a step further. Like I said before, as engineers, it's great. This works, but we always want to do better. And so it just seems like we continue to grow, and we wanted to make sure that we got, I guess, the maximum impact out of the plow. So we decided we'd add artificial intelligence and machine learning because those are the new sexy buzzwords, and we figure if Deere's going to do it, we might as well too. So why do we choose AI? The convolutional neural network design and structure, it helps us to extract features from images. So when we're looking at weeds, we can definitely should be able to make determinations as to species. And then it handles variability pretty well. And again, this is because of decision making. We're trying to eliminate weeds in our production system. So if we till everything, then we're creating a potential for soil moisture losses and everything when we may have weeds that just got missed by the sprayer or they were emerged after spraying. So it may be okay for us to go back and add a different herbicide back to those and kill those. So we went and found an off-the-shelf camera, IDS NXT Rio. These cameras are networkable. They plug right into a local area network that would actually integrated with our PLC, and they run an AI platform inside the camera, and they're pretty easy to use. So we went back and we added these cameras onto the AT3, and we found tested a couple of different configurations, and we found that that upper left, the angled configuration, which is a little bit closer to what Deere has in their See and Spray technology and the orientation of their camera, worked better. So it gave a little bit better view of the weed. So this is that CNN training workflow. Basically, you upload images, you annotate them, you give it information, you train a model, and then you download it into the camera for it to execute. So looking at it from a performance and evaluation standpoint, these are the questions that we wanted to ask. Can we detect a plant? Can the convolutional neural network differentiate between grassy and broadleaf? So we didn't get super crazy with it. We just wanted to know, can we tell the difference between a grass and a broadleaf weed, and how accurate is that? And then from the training standpoint, how can we best utilize our data set? Do we add images throughout the optimization process, or can we just take a small group of images and then from that be able to make the differentiation? One of the things that I want to point out is on that the number of images. What we were trying to do is think about it from a grower standpoint. Is this something that somebody's going to want to spend a lot of time doing? Because I mean, obviously it could potentially be a time sink. So we wanted to make sure that it made sense from the grower standpoint. So we built an image data set, and we cheated. We didn't go out and find weeds and grow those. We actually just used corn and soybeans, potted them up, and then we put them in pots. We oriented those pots, wrote north, south, east, and west on those, and we took still images from those in every combination of orientations to build our data set from. So this is the annotation process. This is actually the view from the camera in the annotation process. So this is in that workflow for the camera system, their Lighthouse software. You take a picture of it, you draw a bounding box around it, and then you give it information. And from that's what it builds the neural network from. So we ran, to evaluate our convolutional neural network, we ran 15 training sessions, 3 different groups with 5 training sessions in each one of those groups. And we did multiple ways that we treated the data. And then we also were able, every time we ran a plant under the camera, to pull the actual image of where it made a determination as to what it was, if it was grass or broadleaf, and make comparisons as to what it actually was. So the training session groupings were A, B, and C. Training sessions 1 through 5, we used our 96 images that had the 4 combination of positioning. In Group B, we used our captured images that we got from the evaluations in Group A, and we added images every time. And then we went back again in Group C, and we used the 400 images that we had captured from the Group A and B training sessions to train. And what we found was when you compare those, does that data set affect our progress? If we got a lot of data, does it slow us down? And also, how does adding the images throughout the training process how does it affect our progress? So this is a loss. So the loss metric basically says, how good is this thing doing? How good is our model identifying plants? And so our loss is, as you can see, it starts out about 68%, and it pretty well stays right around that mark. So we didn't add any new images to it, and what we saw was it's not very smart. So basically, it's going to only detect weeds at best at about, and categorize them correctly at about 70% or at about 30%, because the loss and the actual detection are inverse. So this is our process for evaluating. So we basically simulated this thing working in the field. So we put the plant in the pot on the conveyor, ran it under the camera, and at about 3.5 miles an hour, and we saw each one of the cameras saw all 96 possible combinations of the plant and the orientation. So this is a shot of what's going on as you run it under the camera in real time. And so the two boxes that you see are where it detected 2 plants, and it also the probability that it detected the right thing. So if you can see, both of those say broadleaf, but the probability for those are 54 and 48%. So still not super confident that that's exactly what I'm looking at, which is at this point was a little concerning for us. So we did see, though, however, as we added additional images back into that data set, so this stuff, as we got this back into it, our probability of detection, of accurate detection, started going up. And so we really improved from about 35 or 40% going into this training session, or these training sessions, to almost 70%. So we did see a lot of improvement. However, it's still, again, it's not perfect. But when you compare that to the loss, you can see as that loss comes down, so as the model, basically as the model gets smarter, our probability goes up, which was exactly what we wanted to see, and it showed it in the data. So comparing it from grassy and broadleaf, you can see that broadleaf, for the most part, was pretty well consistent with our grassy, with the exception of a couple of areas where they were broadleaf, and we're still not 100% sure why, but we had a drop in detection from broadleaf to grassy at training session 7, and it could be something to do with bad data. We're really not 100% sure on that. We do know, though, however, that even though we're detecting at 50 to 60% overall, around 60% overall in determination between broadleaf and grassy, we're doing better than we were with the weed seeker sensors, where we were missing a lot of stuff. Again, though, when we went back and evaluated this without continuing to add additional data to it, we saw that loss, or the detection percentage, basically started holding constant again. And I'm not really sure that at this point, this is kind of where we had to do a little soul searching. I mean, as a producer, how many of you are going to, how many of our producers are going to continue to feed images back into it over and over and over again? I mean, it's a very arduous process, and I'm sure that it's not something that most people are going to want to do. So you start thinking about what are our options at this point. And so, again, the great thing about it was, if we're looking at it binary, this camera system works so much better than the weed seeker. We could almost detect it at 100%, but we could only detect, only differentiate at about 60. With the training, again, I'm just, as I was mentioning, who wants to continue to feed this data back into it? It's something that becomes almost a burden, and especially considering the fact that images from one year to the next may have a little bit of variation to them. You may have a little difference in shading and lighting and all kinds of different things. So you basically have to give it every possible scenario that there is. And I'm not really sure, even though we were thinking that an off-the-shelf camera that you can buy for $1,100 or $1,200 would be a good option. The longer we did this, the more we realized, maybe it's not. So when we look at overall conclusions of this, the platform itself, the mechanical and control systems did exactly what we wanted them to. When we wanted it to go down and till the weed out, it tilled it out, and it picked itself back up. The spectral reflectance the sensors, if you're looking for a yes/no, they're okay. With the IDS cameras, they definitely will give you a yes/no easily and almost at 100%. But we're still around that 60% level of accuracy, and I'm pretty sure that that's not good enough. I don't know anybody that wants to go out there and only control 60% of the weeds in your field. So what's next? So this is actually the new upgraded camera system that we have identified. So I guess just to give you a little bit more background on this, USDA has a joint project with us on this, and so they're looking at they're developing weed images and a weed library, a weed database, along with models for operation. So our thoughts are, if this is something that can be useful for a grower, that we should align with what they're doing. That way, their intent is to make every bit of that open source along with the models. So instead of it being the burden of annotating weed images falls on the grower, now it falls on somebody that's a computer scientist that does it for a living. And so the accuracy and the information that's included in the metadata that go along with it are a lot more accurate. So we decided that we would move into that realm where we start using the system that they're using. This camera, also the previous IDS NXT was just an RGB camera. This actually is an RGB camera along with a stereoscopic. So it's giving you 3D image of the weed along with an RGB image. So you're making two comparisons at the same time. So not only are you seeing the color, you're also seeing structure that goes along with it as well. And we think from what we've discussed with USDA, that they're seeing a lot better or a lot higher level of accuracy because of that. Another thing that we wanted to do was add a way for us to spray or till, or spray and till, or do absolutely nothing dependent upon the physiological maturity of the crop and the weed itself. So if we've got something that we know is being herbicide resistant, so say you've got a palm or amaranth that's over 3 inches, it's getting plowed. But if it's something, that's something else, we may be able to just spray it alone with a less expensive herbicide, or not disturb our soil moisture by disturbing the soil. We're adding that capability to it. So basically the spray solenoids that I stole out of the weed seeker, we've added to the back of the plow, and we've done some preliminary testing with those. They do a really good job of providing a herbicide delivery to our weed. So that's the next part that we're adding to it, which we will test all of that stuff in this upcoming 2024 growing season. And with that, this is one of those images here on top that's I think causes a lot of our problems in some of the stuff that we're doing. So we annotated all of those weed images based on leaf structure, and as you can see, there's about 10 or 12 bounding boxes. So we think that that's where some of our error is coming in detection. Instead of it detecting the singular plant, it's detecting each one of those individually. So if you've got changes in leaf structure or orientation when it takes a picture, that may be where a lot of our confusion is coming in. So even though the IDS works great, again, as a binary, we're moving forward with this other system. Again, this work was funded by Cotton Incorporated, and they've been extremely good to us and great to work with. And if y'all need anything you'd like to discuss further, I'm going to be around this evening and in the morning. Take down my contact info if there's ever anything that I can do to help, or if you have questions, or if there's anything that you can think of that we could be adding to or working toward. I'm always open to ideas and suggestions because you guys are the boots on the ground out there every day. And I love to hear the problems that you guys are encountering because it helps me to identify things that I can do to actually do meaningful research that's applied. Thank you all for hanging around. And with that, I guess I got plenty of time. Yeah, okay, I'll take questions. So it has not. We just don't have. We don't have a full data set for any of the other crops. I've run it in corn and cotton. We're seeing similar results. I'm really excited about the camera system this next year because I think we've got a lot of potential here to really get at to taking care of these weeds, especially in early season stuff. So maybe we can catch it, get it out of there before we canopy, and then that way we can let the crop basically naturally control the rest of our weed pressure. So if we can, and again, that's what we've seen already with it. It works really good in underdeveloped crops. So if we can get in there early and get weeds controlled, then we can hopefully be able to manage those long term and during the growing season because we won't have to worry about them again. Yes, sir. So, to begin with, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So the question was when the sensor detects a weed, how long does the plow stay down? And then secondly, what percentage of the time were we wrong, basically? So with that that first trial where we had 30-something% efficacy, it was down a lot. It detected everything under the sun except weeds. So it could find everything but weeds. I'm pretty sure that it plowed up so many shadows that we'll never have to worry about, we'll never have to worry about them again. But we didn't get a lot of weeds. But the system worked. So, we looked on the bright side. We always got to look at the positive. The second trial, we had almost, and we recorded those, and I should have presented that data in here. I think our accuracy was somewhere around, in terms of weed versus no weed, or plow versus no plow, in terms of comparing it to weed to no weed, was almost 97%. So we only plowed 3% of the time when we shouldn't have, and that was with the weed seeker. With the other camera system, with the IDS NXT, that thing it's super spot on. We might have plowed twice out of a 25-acre field. Only twice that we plowed that we thought we saw a weed when we didn't. It was pretty impressive. I just wish that the training process wasn't so difficult. And IDS decided, they started out, they did the whole bait and switch. They have their own training software online, so you don't have to buy anything. You just bring the weeds in there, annotate those, and then download it into the camera. And to begin with, that access was about $200 or $300 a year, and we went to renew that, and they were up to like $1,900 a year. And with the indications, and their customer service is also terrible. So we decided that was another reason for us to shift to this other camera system. So that's one of the things that I didn't bring up is the other camera system. The camera is less than $400, and the processor is about somewhere around $1,900. They're all commercially available, easy to get to. In fact, the processor that we used, I bought off of Amazon, and downloaded what USDA is using to run their stuff. It's open source. The cameras themselves are open source. They're plug and play stuff. So if we can get a model into that processor, then I think we've got a lot more flexible platform. Another thing with that is the fact that, hey, we're looking at see and till with this, but the other side of me is thinking adaptability. And because then if we've got a system that can detect whatever it is, in this case, we're talking about weeds, and it's open source and anybody can access it and the information is out there that's available to us. How many farmers do you know that can't homebrew something? They're gonna get creative and they're gonna start, well, if I can use this to detect weeds, I can build this plow. I can make my own See and Spray. I may have some different idea that nobody else has ever thought of that would be useful for my farm. So you can start really tailoring these solutions to individual farmers as opposed to this blanket approach that the industry is using right now. Yes, sir. So we've figured out a couple of things that we can do. One of those is adding artificial light. So that was a big thing. We actually went back and tried that with the weed seekers, and you wash out so much by adding artificial light. Once you get everything set, the weed seeker doesn't do a very good job at all with artificial light. The IDS cameras did okay, but there was when you add artificial light along with intense sunlight, the image washes out, and it's just, it's basically, think of it like staring at the sun. It's hard to, when you stare at the sun, it's hard to see what's there. So it's kind of that same process. So without that detail, we can't necessarily make any determination. We can still detect that it's a weed, or we think that it's a weed anyway. And we know it. Well, I guess I should back up there a little bit more, because what we did is we set the cameras up to where they're looking in the row middles. So we're looking for air. We're basically just detecting the stuff that's in the row middle, which it's not growing crop. So the way that we thought about it was it's something that needs to be eliminated. So I know there's a lot of exclusion models out there that basically use the crop itself and everything else as a weed. We just used a physical limiter to be able to do that. So, yes, sir. Okay, so the question was, what kind of ground speed were we able to get up to, and how fast do you want to run? How comfortable are you pulling a plow at at what speed? I'm personally plowing, depending upon the growth stage of the crop. If we're talking about immature crop, then I'm going to run 2-3 miles an hour. But fully mature stuff, we don't have fenders obviously on this, but if I had fenders, I'd probably run 10-12 miles an hour. So I was able in mature crop to run consistently 7 to 8 miles an hour, and with really high accuracy. And I should have mentioned that in the presentation. I apologize. That should have been, I know that's always, how fast, will it work and how fast? I mean, we're all about hot rod stuff, so let's hot rod some of our farm equipment. It does, yeah, it does. And so that's one of the things you have to be careful about. We played around with some of that. So we changed the configuration of the plow a little bit and took some of the pitch out of it, to where all we were doing was really just cutting that root, the root of the weed, and still saw the same amount of control. It was just that what I had on there at the time, instead of going and spending a bunch of money on plows, which in the grand scheme of things, I guess is not really that much, but just leave what we got on there and let it run. So yes, sir. So the question is, what happens when we're running an 8 or a 12 or a 16 row cultivator with this technology on there, and our outside unit decides it's going to activate. We've got one weed out there. Have we? So I actually have a set of disc blades, coulters that run in the front of this cultivator. If you've seen one of these, they come with those disc blades on there, stabilizers. And we just took them off because we were running a 4-row, but I have a set of them, and my intent is to get this thing back to an 8-row configuration. So we're typically, most of our production systems are 38 to 40 inch spacings. And my intent is to get this back to something that's commercially available, or something that's commercially viable from a grower standpoint, and get it out there on the farm for growers to use, so we can get true feedback and true data from that we can help to validate some of these answers, and also to provide feedback for you guys to be able to know how to use this. So if they don't, I'm calling Rollicone, and I know they've got something that'll hold it. So they're pretty much my go-to on equipment. I know they overbuild a bunch of stuff, but you don't ever have to worry about it really. For most of the stuff that we do from the research side of things, you don't have to worry about it breaking.
All right. Thank you, Lewis.
Hey, thank you. Thank y'all again.
Buy him a beer later, and he might tell you more stories. He's got some crazy ideas. So our next speaker up is Dr. Joel. Is it Lyson or Lisonbee? Joel's with NOAA, and he is the Southern Regional Warning Director Coordinator. I'll let him introduce his real title. But we're happy to have Joel here to talk tools with basically early warning as far as drought goes, which it's always tomorrow is when we have a drought. So, Joel?
Thank you. Good try. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm going to give you something a little different than what we've seen so far today. As introduced, my name is Joel Lisonbee. I am a climatologist. I focus on drought. I work for NOAA. Within NOAA, it's a group called the National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS. We're the folks that run drought.gov. If you ever go to drought.gov, that's us. The sound in this room is a little bit rough, and I think that let me know if you have a hard time hearing me. There's also not been a lot of interaction here today. I want to go through my talk a little bit more like a classroom. If you have questions, interrupt me as I go. And maybe just to break the ice, I'm going to tell you a really bad joke. Not like a dirty joke, but like just not a very funny one. It goes like this. So there was a school teacher who was trying to get her kids to do a writing assignment. And the assignment was, well, if a doctor gave you 1 week to live, what would you do with that last week of your life? And they had to write about this. I was kind of morbid teacher, but that was the assignment. And to get some ideas flowing, she said, what are some ideas you have? And somebody said, I'd want to go to Disneyland. And somebody says, I'd spend time with family. And then one really clever girl on the back row raises her hand and she says, I'd go get a second opinion. But ching. Yeah, you get it? You get it? Okay, keep that in mind because I'm going to come back. That's going to make sense later on, why I just told you that joke. Okay, so why do we care about drought? I think most of you know the answer to that question. Over the last 5 years alone, drought has cost the U.S. About $4.1 billion each year for the last 5 years. About half of that has been in the Southern Plains region. Just in 2003 alone, drought has cost about $800 million in agricultural loss in Oklahoma. This is an image. I pulled this from drought.gov. This is going back to April 25th, 2003, so just earlier this year when we were in some pretty severe drought here across especially the northern part of the state. So what is drought? I think most of you will be like, well, because it's just when it's dry, that's when drought is. But as a climatologist, I look at drought objectively and I try to come up with a really concise definition for what it is, and there's really not one. In fact, we have 5 definitions for drought: meteorological, agricultural, hydrological, socioeconomic, and ecological. I'm going to go through each of these one at a time pretty quickly, though. When we're talking about a meteorological drought, this is simply a period of abnormally dry weather. It's sufficiently long enough to cause serious hydrologic imbalance. So this is just a long time of really nice sunny days when you don't want sunny days. all the time. An agricultural drought it refers to the conditions that result in adverse plant response, which can range from reduced crop and forage yields to total crop and forage failure. This is usually when you've had that meteorological drought that's stuck around long enough or has come at a sensitive time in the cropping cycle to actually cause some impacts to growing. An ecological drought is similar to a meteorological drought, but instead of managed systems, it's the natural system. And when Mother Nature doesn't provide enough water to keep natural systems in balance. A hydrologic drought is usually a longer term drought. This is when we've had a meteorological drought that's lasted usually a few years, and we see the response to that drought in our reservoirs and streams and lakes and rivers. And even groundwater is counted in the hydrological drought. Socioeconomic drought can be a little bit contentious. Because it doesn't always need to be driven by Mother Nature. A socioeconomic drought is any time water supply doesn't meet water demand. And you can have a socioeconomic drought because we're demanding more water from the system than is naturally provided. Even if you have a really wet year, but you're using more water than is available, you can produce a socioeconomic drought. There's another type of drought that I've been doing a lot of research on lately, and that is flash drought. And this is not really its own type of drought, but it's a subset of all of the other types of drought. A flash drought is when drought onsets very quickly. So it usually comes from a really hot day, like not a hot day, but like a heat wave. So several really hot days where we see increased evaporative demand. We're pulling water from the landscape quicker than it can be replenished. And then this is usually followed by a prolonged dry period. So it's a drought that just comes on fast and it comes on hard. Sometimes it can last only a few weeks, but sometimes it can be the beginning of a much longer drought. There's a few fairly well-known droughts like the drought in 2011 and 12 here in the Southern Plains. That one onset very quickly, and it stuck around for about 4 or 5 years, depending on what part of the region you were in. So this is a look at the current drought conditions across the state of Oklahoma right now. I pulled this from drought.gov. Currently, we have 32.9, almost 33% of the state is in D1 drought or worse, and I'm going to explain what D1 means later on in my presentation. At the moment, we don't have any part of the state that is in D4 or that exceptional drought, even though we did earlier this year. And when we're looking at exceptional drought, the record or the worst drought on record for the state was back in October. Well, it was the 2011-12 drought, but it hit a peak in October of 2011 where we had 70% of the state was in exceptional drought. Any of you around for that? 2011? Yeah? A few heads nodding. Not that fun, was it? No. Oh, so even though I pulled this graphic from the U.S. Drought from Drought.gov, it comes from the U.S. Drought Monitor, which is hosted by the University of Nebraska. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time explaining what is the U.S. Drought Monitor. How many of you have used this map or seen this map? A couple of you, yeah. It's kind of it can be a useful tool, but at times it's a fairly blunt tool. It's used for a lot of things. It's updated once a week every Thursday. It's used for a lot of things. USDA uses it for its livestock forage program and a few other drought relief programs. If your county is in a certain level of drought based on this map, then the Farm Service Agency will provide relief funding for your county. It's also used by the IRS for drought-related tax deferrals. There are a few other programs. I don't have a list of all of them that use this map, but it's used a lot by I guess it's often used as a way to gauge how bad a drought is and where in order to provide drought relief. I'm going to go through. This is not progressing. Oh yeah, I've got 2 boxes that just showed up. The U.S. Drought Monitor is produced by a team. It's a team effort. So we have USDA, the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska, and NOAA, that's the Department of Commerce, which is the department over NOAA. It's a combined effort. And one of the unique things about the U.S. Drought Monitor is it splits drought into 5 different categories, explaining how bad those are. I'm going to go through the next few slides about how the U.S. Drought Monitor is made. With this disclaimer, I'm not the one that makes these maps, but I work pretty closely with the people that do, and I use these maps a lot. And most of the next few slides, or I think 2 of the next few slides, came from Brian Fuchs, who is a climatologist at the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. So, how is this map made? Where does this come up? How do we come up with the drought categories? So instead of using a single indicator or an index like precipitation or soil moisture, it uses a hybrid approach or a convergence of evidence approach, which means instead of looking at one thing, the U.S. Drought Monitor author is looking at about 40 or 50 different drought indicators and weighing out which one is, or sort of merging them together, converging the evidence to see where there's evidence to say there's drought and where there's not. So we've got this objective side of it where we're pulling in actual data, and then there's a subjective side where we have an actual human that's merging that data in a way that makes the most sense for that location and that time of year. So we've got a whole bunch of actual data. It gets fed through the Drought Monitor author. The Drought Monitor author also looks for input and impacts from people that are on the ground and puts all of it, then starts drawing lines on a map. And that's the process for how the U.S. Drought Monitor is made. There are, I think, at the moment, 10 different authors, and they take a 2-week rotation. So one's on for 2 weeks, and then they have about 9 weeks. Actually, it would be 18 weeks off till it's their turn again. And these people are volunteers. They don't get paid, but they're experts in the field, and this is part of their official duties for whatever job they have. So some of them work at NOAA, some of them are at universities, some are at USDA, but it's not part of their day-to-day job. It's something that they take extra time to do. So let's take a minute to understand the drought categories and percentiles. So these are the categories and the colors that show up on the U.S. Drought Monitor every week. D0, the yellow, that's technically not drought. It's just highlighting places that are abnormally dry. It's intended to highlight where things might be trending toward drought but aren't quite there yet. D1 is the first level of drought, and it goes to D4, which is exceptional drought. And what do these mean? So they're percentile based, and it's applied to any data set that has a long enough record that you can pull out the percentiles. So precipitation, soil moisture, evaporation, vegetation, NDVI, all of these things, they work out what the percentiles would work out to be. And they fit the data to a standard curve, and then they split the lowest 30% of data into these different categories. So when you're looking at a D4, well, let's look at D3, because at the moment that's the most severe drought that we see in Oklahoma. A D3 drought works out to be it should fall within the 3rd to 5th percentile of the historical data of whatever parameter you're looking at. Like rainfall, for example. So another way to think of that is that there would be, anything 5th percentile or below, there would be there'd be a 20% chance in any given year that you would come across a drought that bad. Or that's a few advantages to using percentiles. It can be applied to any parameter. It can be applied to all indices, regardless of the length of data record, although the longer data record you have, the more accurate these would become. And it puts drought into a historical perspective. All right, trying to progress. The period of record is also really important with this. If you have a place that has a short period of record, where the Drought Monitor authors are still splitting that into percentiles, but you're not really capturing the full breadth of climate variability at that location. So the period of record is pretty important. Here's a quick list of things the Drought Monitor is and what it is not. It is an assessment of the current conditions and current impacts, which means it's not looking forward and it's not looking back. It's a snapshot of how is drought right now. The U.S. Drought Monitor is not a model. The map is made manually each week based off of previous week's maps. The U.S. Drought Monitor is not interpreting only precipitation, but it pulls in about 40 or so different meteorological parameters. U.S. Drought Monitor is not a forecast or a drought declaration. So you can't look at the Drought Monitor and be like, oh, our drought has been officially declared in this place. A drought declaration comes from local officials like a governor or a mayor can do it. But this is simply providing data to guide those declarations. The U.S. Drought Monitor can be used by decision makers to make those drought declarations, but it is not itself a drought declaration. The U.S. Drought Monitor does not take into account any relief programs, so the U.S. Drought Monitor authors don't really care who's getting paid out for drought relief payments. In fact, they can't. That would provide a bias. And they look just at the observable data and impacts that are being experienced by people. If you look on the map, you'll see some S's and L's around. An S represents a short-term impact or 6 months or less, where L is a longer-term impact. That's where drought conditions have been around for 6 months or more. It incorporates local expert input through an email listserv. So here in Oklahoma, your state climatologist, Gary McManus, is the one who drafts an email to the Drought Monitor authors each week, and he gathers input from people he talks to around the state, and I'll mention him again in a minute. The authors try to be as objective as possible using the convergence of evidence approach. They use physical data and drought indices and indicators, and they have to back up the decisions they make with drawing the maps with the physical data, and at the end of every issue of the map, they also write a narrative of what data they were looking at, what they were weighing more than others, and what things they were considering when they drew the map. Impact data is used to validate physical data, but impacts alone don't drive changes on the map. So I hear all the time that the U.S. Drought Monitor map is not very accurate or is missing some things at somebody's location. I don't know if any of you have felt that way before too, of like, oh, it's drier than like a D1 drought here or something like that. Well, there's some ways that you can get involved to help make the Drought Monitor map a little more accurate. One way is to submit regular CMOR drought reports. CMOR stands for the Drought Conditions Monitorings and Observer Reports, and it's hosted by NDMC at the University of Nebraska. There's a website right up here. If you go to go.unl.edu/CMOR, you can go there and you can upload pictures and you can write a description of what drought looks like on your property. And there's a few questions that you have to answer, like how long have you lived there? How bad is this compared to the last time you've seen it bad? That sort of thing, like how dry is it? And one of the ways to make this CMOR drought tool the most useful is if people were to upload conditions, not just during dry times, but during good times and bad, so that the Drought Monitor authors, let's say the Drought Monitor author is sitting in Washington, D.C., he's part of the USDA cohort there, and he doesn't know what conditions in eastern Oklahoma usually look like, but somebody loads an image of a dry stock pond and says, oh, things are so bad here. But he says, well, I don't really know what normal looks like. I need something to compare to. So the people who upload images and give descriptions a few times a year are the places that we have the most data about how drought is impacting a location. One of the other things you could do is become a CocoRaHS observer. If you go to cocoraHS.org, this is a way to take manually read rainfall observations and upload that to a network of rainfall observations. I know a lot of you probably are taking rainfall observations on your properties already, but one of the reasons that CocoRaHS is weighted more than others is that it uses a standard rain gauge. Everybody's using the same tool to measure the rain. So that's one of the ones that's used a lot. And then I also mentioned getting to know your state climatologist. That's Gary McManus. I didn't write his email address up here, but I think it's gary.mcmanus@mesonet.com or .org. I forgot that. Anyway, you probably just look him up, Gary McManus. Any of you know Gary? Pretty fun guy. A few heads nodding. Yeah. He's the person who feeds information to the Drought Monitor authors. So if you want to raise attention to a part of the state that's experiencing a particular drought at a certain level, send him an email and he can feed that across. I mentioned the conditions monitoring and observer report earlier. So this is the current U.S. drought monitor map for Oklahoma, and I pulled some recent reports. These are just from earlier this month. From both happened to be from the 13th of December, so just a week ago. So here's somebody down in Stevens County, says less water in ponds, creeks, etc. Plant stress, poor pastures are providing marginal feed, supplemental feeding is required. So a U.S. Drought Monitor author is going through these and says, oh, somebody in Stevens County is saying that the stock ponds are low, and they're saying that the color of the dot shows up with the equivalent drought category that somebody assesses that would be, and they say, well, it looks D4 even though the map is showing up as only D1 here. So let's look at some more data there. The other one is coming from actually from Arkansas, but they included a picture which is pretty nice. They're saying very little rain in the last 4 months. Creeks and other ditches aren't running. Ponds are very low. Grazing fields are dead. Also from the 13th of December. So they're ranking things as a D3 drought where the drought monitor currently shows none. So next week, the drought monitor author will see that and start looking at some physical data to support the impacts that would be seen there. So I think the takeaway here is that data is great, but stories are powerful. And if you want to tell your story of how drought is affecting you and your farm, this is a tool to do that. And it's a tool that's looked at by U.S. Drought Monitor authors. Now I want to talk to you about drought early warning. This is what I do for my work, is provide drought early warning for the Southern Plains. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I do it, and so maybe you can just do it for me and it'll save me some work. So if you want early warning for when drought is showing up, you can look at, I usually look at different time scales. So if we're looking ahead at the next week or two, what do we look at? How many of you have a weather app on your phone? Yeah, I think good. Those of you that have it, it doesn't really matter which weather app you use. They're all pretty comparable. And if you want to look at the next few days ahead, that's the place to look. Now, you're probably thinking, now, Joel, that's not just a week's worth of dry weather. That's not a drought. But what you want to be looking for is a period of really high temperatures that might be causing evaporation, and then that being followed by some dry weather. We also have these quantitative precipitation forecasts, or QPF, and evaporative demand drought index, which is a measure of how much evaporation is occurring on the landscape. And these are forecasts. These maps are a little bit old. I wasn't able to update them today. These are from last week, I think Thursday, when I made this presentation. The map on the left is showing it's a 7-day window of accumulated precipitation over that 7 days. So if this was from last week, we had some heavy rain over the Panhandles region over the last few days. I wasn't there. Was somebody verify that? Yeah, heads nodding. I thought I'd heard something in the news about that. And this is a forecast for the next 2 weeks for evaporation, showing that there would be, relative to this time of year, there would be high evaporation over the eastern part of the state and near average over the west, but the Texas Panhandle is showing up with less evaporation. This is mostly driven by radiation and temperature and winds. How am I doing on time? We might make this a little bit, I'm good on time? I might make this just a little bit interactive for a minute. If any of you have a laptop or a phone, I'm going to show you where to find this data on your own, if you'd like. So open up a web browser on your phone or laptop. I'll give you a minute to get there. Maybe somebody shout out if you're there, ready for me to move on. I've got some thumbs up. Okay. Punch into your web browser drought.gov. I'm going to show you where to find these maps and some cool things about them. Okay, so we put in drought.gov. It brings up a home page that looks a little bit like this. If you can see I probably can't see that in the back. Up at the top, there's a menu. Click the menu button, and then go to the first menu option. It says Data and Maps. Open that menu open up the Data and Maps menu, and you have a few different types of data you can pull from. I'm grabbing these from Outlooks and Forecast, which is the fourth option down. and it pulls up the main web page. It looks like this, blue banner with, you scroll down just a little bit, and there's a description of what the weather for the next 1 to 5 days and the next 6 to 10 days is. This is a national description, but it just so happens this week's description, it talks a lot about what we're expecting in the Southern Plains. In fact, it mentions the rain that we had over the Panhandles region. If you keep scrolling past the text description, you'll see some data. The first map that you see is this quantitative precipitation forecast. The default is to 1 day, so that's how much rain is expected today. And then if you tap the next tab over, it shows you a 7-day forecast. And this is accumulated rainfall over the next 7 days. Now, my experience using this is that it's really good at showing where the rain is going to fall, but it's not always that great at how much rain is going to fall over the next 7 days. So I don't really I don't put a lot of stock into the legend at the bottom, but I can look at it right now and I can see, well, there's going to be relatively lots of rain over eastern Texas and Louisiana, Arkansas, the southeastern corner of Oklahoma. But as you move west, there's going to be relatively less rainfall over the next week. So that's one of the places that I look when I'm looking at the short-term drought, is where is the rain going to be for the next week? Actually, more specifically, where is the rain not going to be for the next week? If you keep scrolling down from that page, you'll see some seasonal climate outlooks, you'll see the drought outlook, and then the next map below the drought outlook is this evaporative demand drought index that I'm showing on the right of this slide. And this is a forecast for the next 2 weeks of how thirsty is the atmosphere going to be for the next 2 weeks. And you can also look at a 4-week forecast for the same thing. Any questions about where to find this data? Hope that was useful. Hope so. Okay, so that's what I look for the next week or two when I'm doing drought early warning. All of that's from drought.gov. This is what I'm looking for. I mentioned I'm looking for places where there might not be very much precipitation, and also places where you see higher demand. In the summer months, I'm looking for high temperatures too, but not as useful right now. When I want to look at the month ahead, I look at a climate outlook. And these are also maps pulled from drought.gov, the same web page that we navigated to earlier. The source for these is the Climate Prediction Center at NOAA, CPC. And these are the sub-seasonal outlooks. So on the left is the 6 to 10 day outlook, and on the right, on the right is the monthly outlook. And I'm looking at this, so we've got temperature on the left and then precipitation on the right for both the 6 to 10 day outlook and the monthly outlook. The odds are favoring high temperatures. For the 6 to 10 day outlook over central Oklahoma, odds are slightly favoring below normal precipitation, but for the monthly outlook, odds are slightly favoring high precipitation. Whoa, time out, because what the heck am I talking about? Talking about odds of precipitation and odds of temperature. Why can't I just tell you what the temperature is going to be and how much rain you're going to get in the next month? Because that would be really nice. And I want to explain what some of this means. So we're going to take a little time out so I can walk you through this. So the first question is, what is normal? I just talked about the odds of being above or below normal. Well, what is the normal that we're talking about? And that's pretty important to know, because it's going to be different for what part of the country you're in or what part of the state, and also the time of year that you're looking at. These are the maps of normal. I'm pulling these. The source for this is from the University of Oregon. They have a program called PRISM. And we use a 30-year reference period to define the normal, and that gets updated every 10 years on the year that ends with a 0. And so on the left is the normal precipitation for the month of December. So I was showing December outlook. So this is our normal precipitation for December. And on the right is the normal precipitation. This is the normal mean, it's the normal mean temperature. So it's the mean daily mean. So the daily mean is calculated from the average of the maximum and the minimum, and then you take that average for each day over the month. And then we look at that average over the 30-year period, and that provides the normal for temperature. The normal for precipitation, sometimes we use the mean and sometimes we use the median, and I'm not sure exactly what PRISM is using. I think this is the mean in inches. So that's what normal for December looks like for precipitation and temperature. Now, what is the percent chance? What do I mean when I'm talking about a percent chance or when the seasonal outlooks are giving us a percent chance? This is some data that I pulled from the Southern Regional Climate Center website, and this is data from Stillwater, Oklahoma. And I'm going to step by step build a graph like this. This is the darker blue is observed accumulated precipitation here at Stillwater from January 1st up to, I think it was Thursday of last week when I made this. And then the lighter blue line is that 30-year mean precipitation, looking at the years from 1991 to 2020. And so you can see that here at Stillwater, it hasn't been an awful year, but we've just been consistently at or below that mean throughout the whole year. Now let's build this same map, or let's build the same graph to explain what are the outlooks telling us. So here's a graph, and I looked up some real data for Stillwater, and for the average, for the 30-year average for December is 1.67 inches. When you do December plus January, you've got 2.99 inches, and December plus January plus February is 4.55 inches. So while that's real data, I just drew this line. That's not real data. I tried to go through those 3 points, and I kind of made it a little wavy to represent accumulated precipitation over that time. So we have this 30-year average for the 3-month period is 4.55. The wettest 3-month period, December, January, February, is 8.41 inches. That happened in December 2018 through February 2019. And the lowest was 0.8 inches. We can split this data into thirds. So we have the upper third of data, the upper tercile. This is your above normal precipitation. The middle tercile is your near normal precipitation, and then your lowest tercile is your below normal precipitation. It kind of makes sense, right? So we're looking at all of the observed historical data, we're splitting it into 3 equal parts. And then we're going to make a forecast of accumulated precipitation over those 3 months. And this is a made-up forecast. I just wanted to draw a convenient line on a graph, so this is not the real forecast. Now, do you remember when I started out my talk and I told you that silly joke about that little girl that said she would get a second opinion? I know that it was a long time ago, but I hope you remembered that. We do the exact same thing with our climate science and especially our forecasts. We run the model once and we say, oh, okay, well that ended up just barely in the upper tercile of data. It looks like we might have a wet winter. But there's a lot that we don't know, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the models, and so and there's a lot of uncertainty in the observations that we take at the beginning when we initiate those models. So we're going to build in that uncertainty into the models, and we're going to run the models 100 or so times, over and over and over again. And in fact, the way the US process is that we look at multiple models and multiple runs of multiple models to get as much information as we possibly can to look at what is the model spread and what are they all telling us. And if all of the models agree and come together in the end, then we have high confidence that that's what's most likely to happen. But if all the models spread out, then we have less confidence. This is really hard work because none of us really know the future. If we did, we'd be making much more money doing other stuff than we are right now. We're sort of trying to work the best we can with physics and mathematics to try to understand what the future might hold. So here I'm showing 10 lines total because 10 will give us easy math, but in practice we use over 100 different model runs from multiple models. Well, they all add up to a little over 100. And then we have even a human forecaster that will look at all of them and give different weighting to different models at different times of year. But with that, we can come up with a count of how many model runs fell in that upper tercile, how many model runs fell into that middle tercile, and how many model runs fell into the lower tercile. And so in this particular case, it was 40% above normal, 30% near normal, and 30% below normal, and we can start graphing that up in different ways. So if you go to the Climate Prediction Center website and you click on their interactive maps, you'll see a pie chart that looks like this, and this is a chart of how the models played out in different ways. We also can draw maps of this. So when we're looking, I dropped a pin at Stillwater. This is a screenshot from the CPC website. I dropped a pin at Stillwater, and this is for the next 3 No, this is just for December, sorry, just for December, how the models worked out for both temperature on the top and precipitation on the bottom, and how many model runs fell into each of those three categories. In the current example, there's really not strong odds in any direction, but they're slightly leaning toward above normal precipitation for the month of December. By slightly leaning, the exact number is 39%, or nearly 40% of the model runs are showing that it'll be wet, while there's still 60 of the model runs are below that, but in different categories. Any questions about that and how these are made and how they should be interpreted? So it really comes down to playing the odds. What's the most likely thing that's going to happen? Whoops, I'll keep going forward. I didn't mean to go back. Okay, so if there's no questions, we'll keep going. So I showed this already. This is from the next month, and now let's look ahead at the season ahead. So these are a little bit old because these are issued on the third Thursday of every month, and if you're keeping track, that's this Thursday. So like the day after tomorrow is when they'll get the new outlook. So I'm showing now data that's nearly a month old, and but from this month-old data, odds were very slightly leaning toward above normal precipitation through the December, January, February, and odds were slightly leaning toward near normal temperatures for the month. What about if we wanted to look beyond the next 3 months? What do we look at? We look at things that change slowly in our climate system, and sea surface temperatures are a great example of that. We often will look to the El Nino southern oscillation pattern to provide some forecasts. This is an example of, so what that means is, so here's a map of the Pacific Ocean in a normal year when you have these easterly trade winds that pull cold water up from the deep ocean near the coast of South America and pile that up in the west near Papua New Guinea. In an El Nino year, we get weaker trade winds, which means we get less upwelling and we get warmer water in the central and eastern Pacific. And in a La Nina year, we get stronger trade winds that pull up more cold water, and we get a cold pool that shows up in the central Pacific Ocean. And now the Pacific Ocean seems a long way away. So, this is some actual data from real La Nina and El Nino events and what it looks like with the temperatures. Why do we care about ocean temperatures so far away? Well, the short answer is because they impact weather downstream from them. So on the left is typical changes in weather patterns in an El Nino year, and on the right is typical changes in weather patterns in a La Nina year. We see the jet stream getting shifted a little bit farther to the north over near Alaska, and then we see a wave train downstream from that in a La Nina year. But in an El Nino year, we see the jet stream sort of elongating and shifting south a little bit. And this graphic shows the different impacts that we typically see. And if you look really carefully, you might see something interesting about Oklahoma right there in the middle. And it's that there's really not a strong impact generally over Oklahoma. But how many of you use El Nino? How many of you have been talking about El Nino for the last few months to try to gauge what's going on? A few hands going up. So this isn't strange. This is a tool that we've had for a few decades, and we talk about it and we think about it, and it's part of the way that we try to gauge the risk of the upcoming seasons. I pulled some actual data. This is the Nino 3.4 index. So this is an ocean temperature index in the central Pacific Ocean. On the y-axis and on the x-axis is December, January, February precipitation here at Stillwater. Anybody want to talk about this? Anybody? What do you see? There's not a really strong correlation, but there are a few things we can still learn from this. I want to point out if you look at just the wettest winters on record, most of them most of them fall into an El Nino year, but not all of them. In fact, you have this one outlier, the wettest winter on record happened to be a La Nina year. Something else weird happened that probably wasn't La Nina related that gave you that wettest year. When you look at the driest winters on record, they're a bit all over the place, but So you, like both El Nino, La Nina, and neutral years all see dry years, but when you look at the La Nina, at the winter precipitation in La Nina years, they are generally shifted toward the drier end. In fact, in a previous slide, I was showing that the average for the 3 months accumulated was 4.55 inches over the 3-month period. So if you use that as an average in a La Nina year, you more likely see below average winter precipitation, but there are enough exceptions to that if that's all you are using to try to make your decisions, then you might be wrong a few times. Anyway, that's a few things to take away. La Nina usually means drier conditions for you. El Nino kind of gives you, well, your wettest years happen to be El Nino years, but you've gotten plenty of dry and average years in El Nino years too. So that's, I summarize this by saying it's sort of an okay tool to use here, but I hope it's not the only thing that you're using to make decisions for you. Hope that's useful for you. So what's in store with this El Nino pattern? I mentioned that we don't just take one opinion, but we look at a whole bunch of different models to see what's going on. That's what this plot over here is, but then the people at Columbia University have made this map for us to count how many different models have fallen in different categories. For each month, we're expected to see El Nino stick around through early spring, and then as it wanes, neutral pattern or neither El Nino nor La Nina is the most likely outcome through the rest of the year. A drought forecast, so it begins from the U.S. Drought Monitor, and it's made by an actual forecaster who looks at things like El Nino and the outlooks and makes a forecast of how drought will change. And that's my last slide. I saw Brian stood up a minute ago, probably being like, Joel, it's time to wrap up, but that's it. Okay. Yeah. It's not a very big change. So there are I wish that was a really easy question to ask, or to answer, but different national meteorological organizations around the world have set their thresholds at different levels. Here in the US, NOAA uses a 0.5 degree Celsius anomaly as the lowest threshold for both an El Nino or a La Nina. So a 0.5 degree positive anomaly is an El Nino, and a 0.5 degree negative anomaly gives you a La Nina. Yeah? Typically a strong El Nino or a La Nina will have over a 1 degree change from average. But it doesn't take a lot the ocean temperatures don't change that much usually anyway, so it's a pretty small window, 0.5 degree. But that has to stick around for at least 3 months, so it's not a short-term fluctuation. More questions? Yeah, you're gonna ask another one? Yes, they're doing the same things, but they have different ways to go about it, I guess. So the European model, it comes from the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting, and it's a collaboration of a bunch of different European nations, and they put a lot of resources into making these seasonal forecasts. And at the moment, so even though they go about creating their models in a very similar way, every model is just a little bit different to try to, well, I don't know how much detail to give to answer this, but all models are wrong, but all of them are useful in different ways, and they have different ways to parameterize things that are too complicated to actually calculate. And so the European model and the 2 American models, we have a NASA model and 2 NOAA models. They all go about it the same ways, but at different resolutions or with different parameters. And at the moment, the European model is the one that has the highest skill. And so it's kind of the one that everybody else is trying to beat. So when they're looking at a European model, it usually does very well. The trick to doing forecasting right is to not look at any one model alone, because at any given time it could be biased high or low or wet or cold or whatever. You want to look at as many different models as you can and see, are they agreeing or are they disagreeing, and how well do they agree or disagree. It's getting that second opinion. That's why I told that joke at the beginning. Even though it wasn't funny, I still told it. More questions?
All right, Joel, thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so before, for him? All right, come on, Joel. Or you could just, yeah, come on up.
Thanks.
Meteorologist or climatologist?
So I've got a degree in meteorology, but I work as a climatologist.
So we all deal with a lot of farmers. Okay, we deal with a lot of producers in the state, and they get these forecasts. So is this, when you put all this information together, would you look at it more as like a rifle shot, very pinpointed, or like tossing a grenade? Because they ask me this a lot, like, how pinpointed are the forecasts, or is it just kind of like a, horseshoes and hand grenades?
So I assume you're talking about a seasonal range forecast. Yeah, so
They do the long term, looking at like a crop year, and I realize that the climate is 100,000 years.
okay. Well, let me just address that last thing you said. So anything that's beyond a weather forecast timescale, which is about 2 weeks, we consider climate from a scientific point of view, which is why I, as a climatologist, deal with drought, which works on like a seasonal to annual timescale. And so I'm watching those slow changes in the climate system. When you're looking at weather scale forecasts over the next 2 weeks, well, anything beyond 10 days is for a weather forecast that's telling you exactly what the temperature will be or what the precipitation is going to be. Beyond 10 days is not very good yet. I mean, we're working on it. But I think there's so much chaos in the atmosphere, it's hard to get that right. When you're looking at the next 5 days ahead, it's pretty good. And it'd be more like what was your analogy, like a shotgun or a hand grenade? So when you're looking at the forecast for the next week ahead, those are more of a rifle forecast. I've heard the seasonal forecast described this way: they're too good to ignore, but not good enough to do anything with. And that's kind of a hand grenade approach, isn't it? And there's a lot of possibilities with things like machine learning algorithms and things like that to see if we can squeeze a little more accuracy out of those. And I think when you're trying to interpret those seasonal forecasts, the higher the probability that you are going to be in one of those 3 precipitation ranges or temperature ranges, the more certainty you have that that's what your outcome is going to be. But when you come across things that's like 30% chance of being in the higher upper tercile and 30% middle and 30% lower, that's kind of that could be anybody's guess. And so month to month and forecast to forecast, you can look at how much skill there will be in applying that forecast to a decision. They're not always bad, but they should always be used thoughtfully.
Thank you, Joel. Ooh, that's loud.
Okay, so I want to announce for the grad students, so the winners. So again, thanks all to we'll have one more presentation, then we'll get the QR code. But for the grad students, just so you guys can look today, the posters will be up tomorrow. Honorable mention in the master's level was Gabriel. Good job, Gabriel. So you're number 4. But our number 3 is a poster on sorghum Sudan. So Harsinjam Singh, number 3. We'll get a picture later, okay, guys? Yeah, give him a hand. I think is rigged. Number 2 is the forage sorghum poster with Stephen Sawatsky. Stephen left to tend to family duties. Number 1, wheat protein with Roy Grant. So there's our masters. Our Ph.D. competition. By the way, so all these kids get money. So we're running through money that Dr. Ron. So it's the William Ron Memorial Scholarship monies for this poster contest. Number 4. So the honorable mention was Jay. Where is Jay still here? Good job, Jay. Our number 3 is the soil sensor work with Haytem Mole. Haytem? All right. Number 2 is the small holder sensor work with Ashia Boué. Ashia, good job. You sit down, you don't have to worry. And the number 1 is the work on cover crop and cotton with Brennan Cannon, who also left early, but Brennan is our number 1. So again, the posters will be up through tomorrow. Take a look at them throughout the time. We'll get the last one going through here. I'll make sure there's plenty of time to get to your room, to get to the bar. Again, so we're at the Salty Bronc. After this is over, I am not buying you beer. We have light snacks. It's kind of an organized time to get together and hang out. So let's put it that way. There will be some nachos and some snacks, but we're just hanging out at the Salty Bronc. Buy some of my visiting presenters a beer or two just to make them feel more welcome. Kind of to wrap this up, update of winter wheat research. Since I did the summer crop research, half of it was already done by Sam Aiken, who is trying to get back to California this week. So he's going to be leaving out early tomorrow morning and heading home. But go through the work, and I asked, this is a funny thing, so I asked Dr. Silva, is it turned on? Here we go. I asked Dr. Silva for her wheat work. I was like, man, you got some great wheat work. Send me all the good stuff. I'm not getting any. There we go. Oh. I asked her to send me all of her wheat work because she had some really good stuff. You saw a little bit of the Gallagher Greenhammer work. I thought, man, she's going to send me 45 minutes worth of stuff. I can talk about it. I got 5 slides. And you've already seen 3 of them. So that kind of blew that out of the water. And then this morning when putting your QR codes together for the CCAs, I used this presentation as a template and actually didn't saved over the presentation. So at 9:40, I started off with a blank slate this morning on this talk. So it is what it is. So the work that Dr. Silva did, looking at wheat in with Sampson as a primary graduate student, we got many of Dr. Silva's students in here. This is the stuff you've already heard. I'm going to dive in. This is the multiple crops, looking at double stop Greenhammer versus Gallagher and Iba. And really we get into it, and you've already heard some of this. It was interesting. We pushed Greenhammer. Jeff, I don't know if you remember this. We pushed Greenhammer. In fact, we wanted to name it Magruder because it came out of the Tipton and we thought it was a nitrogen use efficient crop. It was just so strong down at Tipton under extreme nitrogen deficiencies. It was an NUE crop. Crazy thing, we get down to it in the environment we're looking at it now, it's not all that nitrogen use. It's efficient, but it's not showing when compared in this environment versus Gallagher and Iba to be any more or less efficient. Now we're going to get into the storyline here a little bit later, maybe why that is, but it does exceptionally well under stress, but it's not really any more efficient. And so we see here, as far as the Stillwater, the averages, we got the genotypes, grain yield, Iba and Gallagher yield a little bit more than double stop and Greenhammer. And we look at the protein concentration. Gallagher and double stop and Greenhammer have better protein across the locations, which is why we use those. That is new. All right. Uptake, we'd already discussed this. We think the uptake, why is Greenhammer double stop a better protein wheat than Iba or Gallagher? It's because Iba and Gallagher have majority of their nitrogen uptaken by flagleaf. They're setting at about 80% by flagleaf. The nitrogen's in the crop, 85%. Gallagher and Greenhammer have, let's call it, where's Lofton at? They have stay green, Lofton. You love stay green and sorghum, right? That's the word we like to use. They have a stay green, which they're only got about 65% of the nitrogen in the crop at flagleaf. 70, they're taking all of it up later. And that taking it up later is actually translocating really nicely into the grain. So Gallagher and Iba take it up early, store it, and then translocate it. Double Stop and Green Hammer take it up later and send it straight to the grain. And that ends up being those types that do that end up having better grain protein in the end. So the notes, genotype with high protein, high leaf N-uptake, high nitrogen maturity, low protein partition in the chaff. The nitrogen utilization, this actually shows, I would have sworn going into this, Iba was a lower NUE than Green Hammer. That's what my assumption was, which I assume things and I'm usually wrong, as my wife tells me. But, it wasn't. It was utilizing, actually they utilized the nitrogen a little bit less efficiently as far as what they take up and put in the grain than the other two at all locations. And so we're going to come back to this in a little bit. So just keep that in your mind that they're a little bit lower NUE, but they've always been so good. Those are the ones that we rely on to utilize nitrogen well. So I saw yielding well in a low nitrogen environment as being NUE, nitrogen use efficient. We've dug into some stuff. This is Raid and Sherry's work where we looked at all those cultivars from Canvas to WB 4269. And the question was, do they respond different if they have all their nitrogen at plant or all their nitrogen at jointing? And we're going into very deficient. At each location to 4 foot deep, there was no more than 15 pounds of nitrogen to 4 foot deep. So they're deficient. Just know that. They're yellow. The bar over on this side, the greens and the blues, is how much more yield we got out of the varieties if we didn't fertilize until jointing. That means 0 nitrogen until jointing. The gray is it yielded more if it had the nitrogen at pre-plant. And it was really more of the location. By the way, Lahoma last year, does anybody remember where the rain haves and the rain has nots were last year? Did Lahoma have all the rains in the spring? It was kind of our haves nots. So, of course, when you fertilize a crop at joining and it doesn't rain for 90 days, that's not the best scenario. The other two locations got rain when we fertilized. But it's still showing, we're looking at the magnitude. The bigger the line, the better the crop liked to be deficient and then get nitrogen. Because every one of these plants were deficient by the time we applied. Some were sickly yellow. And so just like we're still digging into this, we got a whole lot of data, but we see that Bob Dole didn't really respond. But with the big responders were like the Helix, the Big Country, Double Stop, which I expected on that. The Green Hammer had some nice responses. The Ibas did not. We get in here, so we're digging into it. We have a lot of data. We don't know it all yet. We've got grain size, grain count, head count, plant. We're all trying to figure out what's happening. Second part of this story, which gets back to the first. Oh, never mind, I jumped ahead. I got ahead of myself. I'm still counting how many sites when we look at pre-plant versus all in season, how many sites it's better. I've now got 56 site years all across the state. Pre-plant nitrogen was better less than 4% of the time. So basically 2 locations. All in season was statistically better. It's actually, that number's only 17 times, so it's about 30% of the time it was statistically, which means it was at least 6 bushel, if not 8, 9, or 10 bushel better. So about 60% of the time it didn't matter. At no point in any of these was split application better than all in season. Sam said it earlier. We're having an abundance of data that says don't split unless you're over 85, 90 bushel. Also says don't do pre-plant. This is grain only, walk away cattlemen. This is grain only, but there is less than 1%, or 5% of the time that you're going to benefit from 100% pre-plant, and there's 0% of the time you benefit from split. So what does that lead you to? We shouldn't be putting nitrogen on our wheat until the spring, and that might be January, February, or March. Hello, hello. Oh, we got another mic shot.
I'm getting my steps in. Hello.
There we go. All right. So, also protein, it's not the story, but protein, it's always in season. So the end of this game is pre-plant itself is a single-digit percentage chance of outbeating in season. So if you're going to Vegas, what are those odds? It's low, but it's there. It will do a couple times. In season isn't statistically beating pre-plant the majority of the time, but at least has 30% overall pre-plant. And split until I get to about that, I said 85, I've not refined it. It's going to be the 80 to 90 bushel mark. Then the split hits where I'm wanting a green up shot and a joining shot, or that joining shot. But if I'm rocking 60 bushel wheat, I'm looking at an application mid to late January through March. And that's just the time. Guess what? When do we get the most of our rains on our wheat crop? It starts raining that March, April. That's the time frame. That's the numbers. Bill Ron's data said the same, basically, about the same numbers. So just throwing that out there. I'm still putting this together. We mentioned it, somebody asked me, well, are we doing the K stuff? You know, I talked about the spatial and K. We're doing spatial and wheat with phosphorus. My deal with the potassium is I don't see K symptoms in wheat very often. I do find it in beans and cotton. Phosphorus, I don't find phosphorus symptomology in beans very often, but I can find it in wheat. And so I'm doing phosphorus and wheat, emission strips. This is Clint Wilcox. Some of us know Clint Wilcox. He allowed me to be on his pivot last year because it was by Canton and he didn't have to drive by it. He would not allow me to do this on his fields up by his house this year because he couldn't stand to drive by the emission strip. Some of you would laugh, some of you would not if you know Clint. But we're able to go through there and we looked at, this was starter or no starter, and he actually had 20% of the field that lost yield because it had starter. Now this is north side of Canton, Sand Hill, irrigated. What do you think the starter did? It got it up and going, and it was the sand hills that it just could not keep up with that early vigor growth. But down in the heavier ground, it grew better. So we're going in there, we're doing all the same thing. We're doing spatial, we're doing chemical, physical, to meter deep. We're doing it all over the state. We got them from El Reno, Elk City, Ottawa County maybe, down there. So we've got these all over wheat again this year, chasing that spatial phosphorus number. Oh, I did not. So I apologize. The wheat root things, that when I remade the slide deck in 2 minutes, I forgot that was coming this. We've had an intern that's looked at the roots with and without nitrogen. And I'll have to show you the pictures later. I'll put them up. Now I want to tell you this, the intern tried his best, but I'm not going to publish data from a Brazilian intern. Just joking. It's a little suspect, but there's definitely good information. We put it in the pots. In 2 weeks, Iba had grown out of the bottom of the pot. It had 21 centimeters, so it was a 10-inch root in 2 weeks. Gallagher was shortly behind it. Zero influence of nitrogen. Little nitrogen, high nitrogen, they had the same root mass. Greenhammer, with high nitrogen and low nitrogen, had the exact same amount of root as far as mass goes. But it was only 2 inches deep in the high nitrogen with Greenhammer, and it was 12 inches long in the low nitrogen. It got lazy and it went nowhere, but it produced the exact same amount of root. Low nitrogen, it was the longest roots we had. So are we setting up, how are we setting that crop up? Are we going to follow high residual with Greenhammer and maybe fall on our face because we're not searching? Or is it really good for that ground that's probably wore out a little bit, not got a lot of pre-plant? So we go back to what are we doing pre or post? And it might be cultivar dictated by how the roots respond. Phosphorus strips. This is just some thoughts. We've shared this data. You guys have seen this. No-till stratification, right? I've been dealing with this data more and I've been doing more talks. So I want to throw this out at you to see if tonight at the bar you get thinking about some things. We stratify pH. It goes acidic in the surface. Phosphorus goes up high. You guys good with that? We okay with this in no-till? Surface acidity impacts. Here's my question. You're CCAs. All of you are supposed to know how to read a herbicide label, correct? Are we good with this? Can we read labels as a group? Some say no. How many labels? Are there ever any labels that have an organic matter component to the thing? What's the depth of soil sample for that organic matter? Is it 4 inches, 6 inches, 8 inches? If I'm no-till and I'm 20 years of no-till, my 6-inch sample says 3%. My 2-inch sample says 7%. Oh. What do we do now, James? We up it in no-till? Is that legal? I mean that goes, but with labels, what are these labels built on? Are they built on no-till? Are they built on 6-inch incorporated soil samples where we have tillage and we're going off of, or they're off of I where it's 4% all the way down to the bottom kind of thing. How about pH? I got no-till, I've acidified my surface, now my SUs don't work, my atrazine doesn't work, my metribuzins are falling apart because of acidic surface, then I lime. We don't lime and incorporate to 6 inches deep. In no-till, we lime the surface and it slowly works down, so now our surface inch is not a 6, but a 7.2 for the first year. And we apply atrazine and we have a 7.2, 7.5. Well, now it hangs on an extra while, right? So we've got to think about this, the surface pH, the surface organic matter, what's it done to the herbicides, where are we going with that? And I want to throw this out here. Some of you are already getting angry with me because I used the T word. I'm going to make a strong case where an inversion practice every 15 to 20 years, depending on the circumstance, could have benefits. I'm not talking every year. Some of you got really excited to see a plow. Not every year. I'm talking to flip it, get right back on it with some seed, get it covered, get some cover on it. But think about that. I've got an acidic surface. Y'all have been farming a long time out here. What did we used to do when we had a little bit of soil acidity? We deep plowed and brought it back up and we made everything better again. We're banding on the surface. We got an organic matter layer, we got a phosphorus layer, we got a potassium layer, we got an acidic soil layer. We got all that weed seed that has been getting freaking Roundup or glyphosate resistant, all the resistance. Let's flip it. Bury it 6 inches down. Now I got a nutrient-rich zone at 6 inches that has organic matter, it has phosphorus, has all the stuff that needs to be down there. And if I bring up old seeds, hopefully they're also non-resistant. I can be smarter about my herbicide management strategy and I go in more aggressive. Let that stuff lay for 10 to 20 years and bring it back up and maybe we've got better ideas for that. I don't know, but a one-time inversion, we're doing more and more science on it. One-time inversion isn't near as bad on the soil parameters as you might think. Again, one time in 15 years, not one time every 6 months. It's a different thing, okay? Just throwing that out there. Just some thinking to be doing later. I've got to send off the quote for this and how to do this, but I'm trying to get soil testing in joint with OCC. So the Haney test, the water test, all the tests, they've been much more troublesome to go to a high throughput manner. But my lab will be running those, not the soil testing lab, but the soil research lab that we're running. And that means we're building a database. Part of what we're able to do is I've got all these old studies that I presented before that I have the soils for, so we can do correlation calibration studies using old data, and we can have the data we need for some of the new analysis. So just an update there. And finally, I hope I don't piss anybody off, and it's okay if I do. Liquid calcium work. This liquid calcium is calcium chloride. The end, okay? It's food grade calcium chloride, understand that. Their application rates are 2 gallon, 4 gallon, 6 gallon. I compared it in an incubation study with ag lime, or actually hydrated lime at 2 ton, 4 ton, 6 ton, and ag lime at 1 ton, 2 ton. And, oh no, I'm sorry, these right here are equivalent to, this is the calcium you deliver in 2 gallon, calcium you deliver in 4 gallon, calcium you deliver in 6 gallon. This is ag lime, this is true ag lime out of a quarry. Look what the ag lime does when I put 2 ton down, and look at what the other things do to pH over an 8-week cycle of wetting and drying. I've got plenty of podcasts, plenty of things about how lime works. This is why a cation combined with a carbonate works, and a cation combined with a low salt does not work at quantity. So that's what the pH does. These are actual numbers in the statistical analysis. It did something. If you put a little bit in, it was slightly better than the check at 4 gallons, but we're talking a change because my data was so good. All I had to do is change the pH by 0.01. It was statistical, which meant in 8 applications I did pretty good. But it's still, we're talking here to there. Finally, this is field work. Nobody's seen this. We started a Bermuda grass study in 2019 where we put out hydrated lime at the calcium rate of ProCal, which was 7 pounds of hydrated lime per acre per year. That's hard to do, 7 pounds per acre of hydrated lime. I'm just telling you, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. We've got hydrated lime at the lime recommendation. It was a 2-ton rate. We got Pell lime at 100 pounds per acre per year. ProCal at 3 gallons per acre per year. Advanced Cal, which has humic acid, 3 gallons per acre per year. And Nanotech DCL 50 at 1 gallon per acre per year. These are the soil test results. We started in 19. This was collected this spring. This is the untreated right here. This is the hydrated lime. It's not really statistical enough error. We have lime as a 6.8, so it went 4 to 6.8. Here's all the other treatments. 100 pounds of Pell lime broadcast every year from 2019 through 2023 has not changed the pH. At 100 pound rate. If I put 2 ton down, it would have done it. Okay? Also on the yields, by the way, this is an old Bermuda grass stand. I'm not improving yields. Something we need to talk about and look at. When I go and try to fix pH in old Bermuda grass stands, it doesn't seem to care. New Bermuda grass seems to care. But if I go to something that's 20, 30 years old, I don't know if it's just like conformed itself to the environment, but I don't get the responses I do if I go into a newly sprigged environment. It very well could be the rooting depth. We've had this discussion. Could it be rooting? Could it be physiology? Could it be a selection parameter? Because it would have acidified slowly, so you're selecting for the plants that keep providing. So there's a lot of unknowns, and I think it's a combination of all of it, right? I think it really is. By the way, phosphorus at this site paid a lot of money. That's what got yields. It's right at 6 o'clock. I didn't mean to go that long, so please forgive me. If we could put up the QR codes, it would be the nutrient management 4 to 6, slide number 4. Thank you, Dave Deacon. By the way, give a hand to all of our AV crew. Did they delete the slide set? Dave Deacon is our recorder, so some of you might remember him from Sunup. Oh, by the way, with Joel was asking about Gary McManus. You may not know him, but you know his memes. How many of you laugh at the MesNet Facebook and stuff? That's Gary McManus. He is the comedy behind the MesNet system. The Brahms warning system, that's all Gary. Okay, we're getting there. 1, 2, 3. One more. There you go. And I'm going to have them up front. I will be making my way over to the Salty Bronc, and anybody that wants to come over to have a little bit of cussing and discussion, we welcome it. Otherwise, everybody be safe this evening, and we'll be back here again tomorrow morning bright and early at 8 o'clock to start out our next session.